My name is Maya Rahman. If you had walked into my life 2 years ago, you might have thought mine was the kind of ordinary success people post about an apartment with a single plant that thrived, a job that paid the bills and fed my curiosity, a circle of friends who liked each other and crowded my living room for dinners. I was 30, careful, ambitious in a quiet way. I had a steady job at a small but growing media tech startup called Lattice, where I led product marketing. I loved how language could steer behavior. Marketing felt like a craft where persuasion and ethics could still hold hands. I also loved Adam, the man I thought would be my partner forever. He was smart in the way I am, not bold and easy with people, the kind who could walk into a room and make 3 enemies feel like allies before the night ended. He had charm and impatience and an appetite for attention. He photographed better than he read, yet people listened when he spoke because he looked confident. We were together 5 years. We lived 2 blocks from the river. We had a flat that remembers when we stayed up late and cooked too much garlic. I will tell you what ruined me in a single sentence. I trusted him with a door he used to lock me out. The opening of the door was tiny, an argument about candid photos, a fight about a launch party. He told me in a way meant to be soft that I should be more public, that the company would trust a leader who had charisma, not a leader who hid behind spreadsheets. Because I loved him, I tried. Because I loved my job, I tried. I let him photograph behind the scenes of a campaign, quick, casual shots that I thought of as memories. But one evening, when a manager at Lattice insisted on reviewing access logs, someone noticed unusual activity in the prototype repo. A segment of a product landing page, confidential copy and user scenario flows had been posted in a private Telegram channel that labeled it as leaked beta. The channel forwarded it to a competitor. The competitor posted screenshots in a forum. Overnight, a rumor began. Maya had leaked crucial IP to benefit herself. People called it careless at first, then staggering, then plain crime. My career was a tidy file that suddenly had the words breach of trust stamped on it. I remember the first email, "Please come to HR." It read. The sentence that followed was worse. "Pending review, all project access revoked." My stomach went hollow like a glass emptied all at once. I called Adam. He said he'd come over. He arrived with a composed face, a little too relaxed. He touched my hand and told me, "It's going to be fine, Mia. They'll see the timeline." He said the word timeline as though a timeline could be a shield. HR called me into a small room with blinds and a woman with an even voice. "Maya, we need an explanation for the breach," she said. "Your credentials were active at the time this file was posted." They showed me a log, timestamps, IP, everything. My username, my office machine. I explained that I had been reviewing before bed, that I had used the office Wi-Fi in the afternoon, that sometimes my laptop hung and I'd pre-schedule builds. They nodded like mechanics hearing one more plausible story. But I could see the ledger in their eyes. Speculation is sticky, and the more you try to shake it off, the more it clings. On the 3rd day, a private investigator called from a small firm. "We represent Lattice," he said. "We need to preserve your devices." The word preserve felt criminal. They took my laptop and my phone, wrapped carefully with tags. I walked home with a hollow in my chest. The company issued a statement to investors that read, "We are investigating a potential intellectual property leakage." The local tech newsletter ran an item, "Lattice, security concern." My manager, who had always sounded like reassurance itself, walked past me in the corridor as if he didn't see anything at all. And Adam. He turned his back to me in ways that were not dramatic, but final. He posted on social feeds a carefully worded post about integrity in leadership. A friend popped into my inbox with a screenshot of his message, a line like glass, "We must hold ourselves accountable." He didn't call the reporters. He didn't say he loved me. At a mutual friend's wedding, one of our colleagues leaned in and asked, "Did you hear? Crazy if Maya did that." The suspicion was all the town needed. It became a rumor that fed itself. There was a point in the early weeks where I felt my life unspooling in small grotesque motions. Clients canceling calls, PR teams pacing, friends offering advice in tones of distance. People who had supported my ideas took their names off of joint decks. My mother called twice a day from the other side of the city asking if I'd eaten. Even kindness arrives with suspicion after a scandal. Then one evening, after weeks of cold silence and the slow erosion of everything I had built, I found the thread that changed everything. Adam's colleague, a woman who had helped him with editing captions, had messaged me a single screenshot, the kind that lodges in your mind like a splinter. It was a chat between Adam and someone else. The tone was triumphant. "We'll post tomorrow at 10. Adam had written, "They'll cancel her access by Friday." The message was small, and yet it was a canon. The image had a time stamp. The voice note attached to it had Adam laughing about controlling the narrative. He had done this. He had set the leakage to look like my mistake. He had the camera. He had given the files to someone who would make them look fraudulent. I read the messages so many times that my eyes blurred. My first reaction was not fury. It was a great, gasping grief, the kind you feel when you discover that the house you thought you built with someone is actually one they have been remodeling into a trap. For weeks I had been the accused. I had been waiting for my defense. Instead, someone had been planning my fall like a script. When I confronted him, his face did not carry the shame I had imagined. He had the practiced lawyer's calm, a small frown and immediate deflection. "I never meant for it to go public," he said. "I only wanted to test the theory to show the market how fast a rumor could move. I felt the air leave me in a small sound. You used me as an experiment," I asked. He shrugged like someone dropping a weighty book. "It's complicated, Em. We were building a way to control narrative flows. Sometimes you sacrifice an asset. If I am an asset, Adam, then you are a monster," I said, and he looked at me like someone who had finally seen the person he'd toyed with. In nested cruelty, the rest of the world heard what had always been a private thing, him calling me Em, and my quiet tithe of love offered to his experiments. Lattice let me go quietly. They said the investigation was ongoing and that we were parting on mutual terms. The word meant, "We cut you free because the company is fragile." They sent me a final email with compliant language about NDA and an exit package that was legally tidy but emotionally brutal. I had lost my job and my name in one human-sized motion. The thing about being accused in the modern age is that accusation leaves tracks that are not easy to erase. The internet does not forgive easily. There were posts, threads, comment sections where your life was reduced to a phrase, "the leaker." My inbox filled with people who wanted to know the truth and others who wanted to expose the monster. Some messages were venom, others were pity. Both felt like a slow, grinding erasure. I took the long cold of the months that followed as raw material. Grief has a habit of turning into resolve when you starve it of the performative outlets the world offers. I did not craft a public defense immediately. I did not go on podcasts or do the thing the PR consultants advise. Instead, I obeyed a quiet voice that said, "Gather proof, secure witnesses, and make the world have to listen to documents rather than drama." I left the city that winter with a small suitcase and a single plant in my arms. No one knew where I went. I took a farmhouse rental upstate, a place with no neighbors close enough to overhear, and a long desk by a broad window that faced trees. I began two things. One, the methodical work of putting my life back together with paper and testimony. Two, the secret art of reinventing a voice that could not be easily canceled. There will be people who tell you revenge consumes you. Maybe that's true if you mistake revenge for spectacle, but the first months for me were word and ink, and the tedious setting of traps for a system of falsehoods. I learned to read logs the way another person learns a language. I met a private forensic analyst, old and cranky with a precise mind, who taught me how to follow an IP like following a living thing. I found an old colleague at a rival firm who owed me a favor and dug into backup chains and timestamp metadata. I made friends with people who had been burned by rumor before me, artists, journalists, and an earnest programmer who thought code could be moral. There was another thing I did. I taught myself the coldness of schedule. Every step had a time and a logic. I changed every password in rotations like a ritual. I taught myself how to archive. I recreated my email receipts, pulled invoices, found the original drafts on offline saves, and had them notarized. I transcribed conversations and asked colleagues to confirm dates and times. I was boring in a way that is rare online, and boring has a quiet, necessary power, the power of evidence. And in the evenings, when the house grew thin and the sky folded into frost, I painted. I painted the kinds of things I had stopped making when my life felt like a performance. Crowded subway cars, hands pressed to windows, an empty chair at a table. My brushstroke was the same as my ledger, careful, intentional, without the need for applause. The awakening was slow. When the first crack appeared in Adam's life, it did not look like karma. It looked unglamorous, the way small things fall apart, a sponsorship pulled quietly, a friend removing their endorsement, a client's email that read, "We're assessing our affiliations." Rumors live on attention. Those who once fed it began to dry up. And while the world loves a scandal, it also likes the comfort of correct attribution, especially when evidence begins to rely on facts rather than whispers. I will not tell you that my comeback was a single triumphant moment. It was not. It was a long, patient pulling of threads. The analyst that traced a suspicious upload to an IP logged near Adam's studio, a charitable trustee who confirmed a suspicious deposit matching a personal wire, a co-worker who remembered a phrase Adam had used in a staff meeting that later appeared in a public post mocking me. We collected things until the accusing narrative would no longer hold water. Two things changed the arc. First, a careful journalist, the sort that cares about the tediousness of truth, agreed to look. She read our documents and found holes in the timeline that did not match the story the rumor had told. Second, I learned to take the stage on my own terms. One night, at a small arts salon, I put up a single painting named The Quiet Ledger, and beside it displayed a column of documents with dates. The room was not big, but it mattered. People looked, they read, they nodded. Certainty is contagious. Once a respected reporter published a piece about how online narratives are weaponized. Including the redacted pieces of our file, people began to ask new questions. It did not happen with a single shout. It happened with the steady application of incontrovertible proof. But the key lesson I learned in those quiet months was this: revenge without repair is hollow. If you want to win, then build a scaffolding that protects others. My return would not be simply a personal vindication. I wanted infrastructure, mechanisms for artists and teams to prove provenance, and procedures that prevented one person's narrative from erasing another's life. And so, when the time came to step back into the city, I had already made the world tired of one story and curious for another, the story of how truth could be recovered if someone cared enough to file it. When I came back to the city, I walked slowly, as if I were reconciling the past with the present. People recognized me sometimes and gave that embarrassed half-smile of "we were wrong," but recognition was never the point. I did not want attention for grandness. I wanted a platform to speak about systems. My return strategy had 3 pillars: documentation, policy, and public narrative. I wanted to build something that mattered beyond me. With my analyst and my lawyer, we subpoenaed a limited set of records and compiled a clean, prime binder of facts that could withstand any casual dismissal. We had backups of my drafts with timestamps and witness testimonies from colleagues who could attest to dates of showing and critique. The internet's ability to manufacture pictures out of context was undeniable, but it cannot erase notarized documents and sworn statements. I partnered with a small advocacy NGO that worked on digital rights for creatives. We drafted a simple policy toolkit, a standard provenance clause for creative contracts, a basic evidence pack, template for artists to store metadata, and a recommended practice for companies to have neutral third-party auditors for IP claims. We taught people how to watermark, how to keep hard copies of drafts, how to use two-factor authentication, and a tiny checklist for commissioning work. These tools were boring in a way that made them useful. This was the delicate part. You cannot simply shout "I was wronged" and expect the world to hang on. You must build a story that invites people to care in a way they can act on. My approach was to be factual in public and rigorous in private. I wrote a long essay that combined the personal and the procedural. It was not a screed. It named the pattern, showed the documents, and recommended a way forward. It went viral in the careful circles that matter: product managers, legal counsels, and curators who donate attention where procedure matters. A decisive moment came when a respected data privacy columnist ran an investigative piece that aligned with our records. When a journalist with traction demonstrates that a rumor lacks temporal coherence and offers evidence of coordination, the tide turns in a way that's oddly boring. People who once enjoyed saying things like "I heard" and "it's obvious" began deleting their posts. The technocratic world cares about plausibility and receipts. Adam, meanwhile, seemed surprised as his foundation of curated praise dissolved. Contracts evaporated. His Instagram feed, once full of glossy frames and endorsements, began to look like a shell. He called a friend and left a voicemail that was a mix of panicked logic and attempts at justifying a strategy. I kept the audio file. It was damning in its casualness, but I didn't want to use it to humiliate him publicly. A kind of justice I trusted was legal clarity and structural repair. We negotiated a private agreement that included partial restitution and a clause requiring the companies involved to adopt certain transparency practices. The legal world can be dull and effective. I had learned to love its dullness because it changed future behavior. One evening, a week after the column exploded, a small nonprofit running workshops for emerging creatives invited me to speak about digital safety. I accepted. I taught young artists how to embed provenance, how to archive drafts, and how to ask for the line item invoices when money or credit was involved. It felt like a small victory, making tools available to the next person who might be targeted. I also started a podcast series where we interviewed other people who had been canceled, abused, or misrepresented online. We didn't sensationalize. We analyzed. We unpacked the methods, the legal steps, and the slow remedies that produce enduring change. People who had once scrolled past headlines began to take notes. There was a public reveal I could have orchestrated a spectacular moment at a large conference where I'd walk on stage and show the files and watch the world gasp. But spectacle is sensational and sometimes shallow. Instead, I did something slightly less dramatic, but to my mind far more potent. I organized a panel of legal experts and curators to present a proposed artist-friendly provenance code at a well-regarded industry symposium. We distributed the code and it got picked up by a small but influential guild. In the months that followed, organizations who had affiliations with creative labor adopted it. If you ask what revenge looks like in my story, it looks like that. A boring, bureaucratic change that makes it harder for one person's lie to erase another's life. Of course, people still wanted to know whether I felt safe. The short answer, no, not always. Trauma doesn't evaporate with evidence. It colors decisions, trust, and lonely nights. But I felt steady because I had built systems that undermined the opportunity for the same crime to be repeated so easily. And the public arc of my life, it bent back. Slowly commissions returned. Galleries that had been cautious requested a private showing. A journalist asked me for an exclusive long-form piece, not about the scandal, but about how to prevent similar ones. A curator used a line from my essay in a symposium. People would come up to me at small events and say, "Thanks, I taught my students this." It was modest work, but it had a rippling kind of dignity. I did not thrive on revenge. The point was repair. When Adam's sponsor finally terminated their association after independent review, the outcome felt like balance rather than triumph. He faced the consequences of his actions, but the story did not need the water of his ruin for me to feel whole. I had something else. I had a voice, a toolkit, and a city slightly safer for the next person. My relationship with people shifted. I was slower to open my door, but also surer of what to look for in a partner. I met someone 2 years later, a woman who loved quiet mornings and bad coffee, who had patience for legal documents and little rituals. She never said dramatic things like "we'll change everything," but she showed up to hearings and proofed my emails. Her presence was a comfort I did not expect to need, and a gentle rebuke to the myth that I needed a vengeful climax to feel fulfilled. People ask me whether I ever wanted him to feel what I felt. It's a fair question. There were nights I wished for some raw poetic justice. But justice, I realized, is less about punishment and more about the ability to prevent a repeat. It's like tending to a garden after someone ignited a match. You dig, you clear, you plant again, and you place stones around your seedlings so they take root. There were moments of private satisfaction, the hum of a printer spitting out a subpoena, the small thrill of seeing a policy change endorsed by a major gallery association. But the real reward was far smaller and tender, a letter from a parent whose child had been harassed online and who used our toolkit to help their teen. They wrote, "We printed your checklist and walked through it together. For the first time, I felt like I could help." I read that letter like someone might read a lighthouse. I have hours where I sit and look at what used to be my life and wonder at the strange architecture of survival. Once, in a small panel, a woman asked me if I regretted not yelling more, not making a spectacle that would have felt satisfying. I said I wanted the world to change. Yelling makes noise, building makes rules. There are those who believe spectacle matters more. I do not entirely disagree, but building the conditions for others to survive is a gravity that binds me more than any opportunity for a single viral moment. There were losses, friends who shifted their loyalties, relationships that never recovered. There was a tenderness I once had for certain people that was inevitably scarred, and yet there was a steadiness in the work. I taught, advocated, lectured, and art kept me alive. I made prints that now hang in small community centers with my provenance stamp and the small policy checklist tucked under glass. Artists call me sometimes and ask for references. That calling felt like repair more than revenge ever could. One day, years later, I stood in a small gallery as crowds drifted by my work. A woman tapped my shoulder. She had the look of someone who had studied my story and had then done something brave. She said quietly, "I used your checklist. I made my students keep drafts and timestamps. Now they can prove their work. Thank you." We talked for a long while about how small things can change a culture. When you rebuild, the roots grow deep. They reach into places where light sometimes cannot. They anchor you. They do not make the storm stop, but they change how the tree bends. I am not saying I am beyond regret. I am not saying there aren't nights the old rage returns like a cough you can't shake. But I am saying that the shape of my life has changed from being an object to being an agent. Once I was someone who could be spoken about on a message board. Now I have the power to speak back with documents, systems, and education. That rebalancing matters more than any moment of public vindication ever did. My name is Maya Rahman. People remember the headline, maybe the scandal. Some remember the art. Others remember the policy memorandum. The most meaningful letters are from people who tell me they taught their children how to retain drafts and protect their work. Those small acts multiply. In the end, revenge, if you must call it that, was never about the downfall of a man. It was about the rising of systems and communities that make such falls less likely to happen again. It was about teaching people how to keep their roots, how to find soil, and how to ask for receipts. The world is imperfect. Sometimes the roots have to do the building. I did not want the spotlight. I wanted a city that did not burn as easily. So yes, I returned and I thrived, but not by crushing the person who broke me. I thrived by handing others tools to live with dignity, by making the next rumor cost someone else not just a day of viral attention, but the work of legal checks and the shame of evidence. That was the kind of revenge I believed in, boring, grout, and practical. We planted a small community archive in a neighborhood arts center, wood shelves, a scanner, and a small instruction poster on how to document your process. An artist asked me once with wet eyes, "Why did you do this?" I told her simply, "Because you shouldn't have to start burying yourself to be heard." She laughed and hugged me, and the hug felt like a contract. When I walk the river now, the plant by my window is bigger. The flat has new light. I am careful who I let in. I have a partner who can hold the line when I am tired. I drink coffee that is never perfect, and I laugh at jokes that are sometimes stupid. Life goes on. It is fragile and vivid, and I am forever on the side of people who build things that make the next person safer. They thought they buried me. They were wrong. The roots remember what has been burned. When given a chance, they push through the soil and break pavement. That is not revenge. It is growth, and it is the thing that keeps the world from unraveling.